Okay, so we have now taken the thread from the right side of the loom and we've come across the top and locked in that top row through all these beads over this cotton thread, and then we've got the thread from the left side of the loom coming through the beads to what we strung them on to begin with, coming up underneath here, so you can see a little bit that's here. So here's the first row. As I'm going to actually work and cinch this down, it will actually kind of bring this whole piece with those two knots, it'll bring it together to where we need it to be for the size of this project. So now, as you can see, looking at the loom, the beads themselves will maintain the holes and the split between the threads. That'll help our project continue on from there. Now, just as a word as I'm working on this, there's different types of beadwork obviously. Most of the work I do is for Native American style dances and so on, and so just as a word for that, in most of the cases that I've run into, you want to be very careful about the designs you pick. You know, this isn't a project necessarily for general consumption. This is actually a project I'm doing for a friend of mine and his little boy. So, you know, a lot of times the designs may represent either tribal influences or clans or any number of things. So you need to be kind of careful as to what you're putting on the loom, and just be careful not to copy somebody else's work like that just because it looks pretty. There's other styles of beadwork. They may not have the same rules and considerations. Just saying. The other piece is another thing to consider is when doing this type of beadwork for these types of people. I've always been taught that when you get started with everything, before you begin, you know, put a good thought down for the people you're making this for, and go on that way with where you're working on the rest of it. Now, we've already said this is 31 beads across, so we've got those locked in. These tails are going to get locked in down the thread as I go. So now the top thread here, I've already gone and strung the next row of beads, the next 31, and I'm going to bring it again underneath these loom threads. Now you don't want to go underneath the ones on the bottom because you've got 2 layers of loom threads. You just want to go right here between these so that you're coming underneath this. And then as I pull this through, I'm going to end up with a section of these that now I can push up through my beadwork like so. And that's going to be what this looks like for the rest of the project. Now, as I go through all of this, that's going to set right into place. I now take the needle that came on the right hand side now. See how these interchange? You want to keep track of that. This is the thread I just brought under. This is the thread I had under from the last one. This will now cross over and go through these top pieces here as I lock these in. And it's one of those things you always, you know, once you get a pattern set up, whether you're putting the left thread under or the right thread under, whatever it is. I'm left-handed, so I like the left thread to go under every time. Once you get that determined, you will always maintain that same pattern. If you don't, you will have problems because somewhere something's not going to get grabbed onto. So just make sure that you're doing that. This beadwork naturally feeds that process. It sets up kind of a ladder in a sense, because the next row will lock in the row before that and so on as it goes along. So it's actually a really easy way of doing this beadwork. It's real simple. When you're threading this top thread through, make sure that you're trying to hold these beads from the bottom so that you're not putting your thread through the cotton warp threads. You know, it's going to happen at some point or another, but it's just a little bit easier to try to keep these threads from crossing each other. You don't want your threads going through each other. You don't want them going through the thread that's underneath here. You don't want to accidentally lance that with this one, because that'll just tear up your thread and give you problems when you're doing your beadwork. And that's pretty much all you're going to end up doing. So as I get this last few beads here, you'll see once again that this thread that's now moving right to left is coming out the top above these other pieces. So now the next line I'm going to do, this thread's going to go right underneath here and be the under thread for that next row. So here we go. I've got the thread here, I've got the loop from the thread here. I'm going to want to make sure that these tails are tucked in, because in a sense, in a simple sense, these are going to lock that in. I can make sure my tension's good. You don't want it too tight, you want it just tight enough, and then as you pull it to, it's all you need to do. So again, now that that's finished, there's 2 rows and it's just going to continue on from there. This left thread, again, now that it's come out the top, will go underneath here once I string the right number of beads. And this one here that is coming from the bottom will now go over the top, and it will do that continually through every single row. So that's it. That's all there is to the 2-needle method. It's real simple. It's a real simple loom to use. When I get further down, I can always work right here. If I need to, I can actually move the beadwork up and down the loom. I can, you know, kind of move that whole piece as I'm going along, and always keep working here. So thank you very much. We'll see you in the next episode.